Absolutely. Yeah, that's. I mean, you hit it on the nail, hammer on the nail. So
I hit it on the hammer with the nail.
the nail on the hammer. Yeah, it ain't something like that. Listen, I got fat. Now I'm hungry. So sorry. It's no.
Return to Roots Podcast. Welcome. Today we're bringing you Jerrod Smith, part of the One Hundro Club, and also a veteran of the United States Army. Without further ado, Jerrod, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Jerrod, can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah. So absolutely. So my name is Jerrod Smith. I'm the owner of Lone Star Valor Funding. I guess basically I'll kind of start from the beginning. So I was a little toddler. No, I'm just kidding. I won't go that. I won't go that far. But so I basically joined the Army straight out of high school. Like literally 4 days after graduation, I was on the plane to the Army. I did 13 years. I actually had two MOSs in the Army. My first job was a combat engineer, so I got to play with explosives. My wife didn't like that, so she said, "You need to change." So I became a respiratory therapist, and did that for another 8 years. But I had some injuries that kind of caught up with me from my combat days, and they tried to do some surgeries. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and they medically, discharged me out of the Army. And so for me, like my exit wasn't really planned. So it was kind of a rough exit for me. It took me a while to kind of find my path, I guess, so to speak. And so I've kind of found it. I feel like helping small businesses with trying to figure out their funding to keep their businesses in operation, help them expand, help them grow. And I try to really help, especially the veteran community, veteran business owners, to really go above and beyond for them to make sure that they get the proper funding and they're not getting scammed, or they're not, getting pushed into those car dealer, 40% interest rates, type scenarios, and make sure it makes sense for their companies.
Bro, what's the E3 going to do with their money if it's not to go get a 40% loan on a Corvette? That's more than what they make in 2 years. Okay, man. Like, why are you crushing every E3's dream right now, brother?
So that's what so part of my path to this journey was I actually I couldn't figure out what to do, and so I went into sales, and I ended up finding a job into car sales through that path, and I knew I messed up because I'm down here in San Antonio, and so I had a job at the dealership, and I had an airman from Lackland come in, and I sold him a car, and then afterwards, we give him the keys, make sure everything's good, right? And so I always like to try to figure out, how did finance go? You get everything you needed, and this guy was like, "Man, I'm happy, but." I got 24% interest rate. And I'm like, oh man, did I just mess up? Like I just became the person that we've all talked about not becoming, like, or not doing to these guys. And I'm like, like it crushed me because I'm like, I didn't want to be that, I didn't want to do that to them. And so yeah, that was like, oh, shit, sorry. But yeah, that was like my wake up call. Like I need to find something different. Like this is not for me. I ended up quitting the dealership and going to work for a nonprofit here in Texas, helping homeless veterans. And so that has been a blessing in disguise, and it's been a great operation there, helping them.
Yeah, no, hey, really quick, everybody that's listening, I want you guys to do me a huge favor. I want you to go ahead, hit like, subscribe, and share. Jerrod's message is going to be really awesome for our community to hear. And yeah, hey, Jerrod, what is the best way to get a hold of you, brother?
Yeah, so you can either email me at admin@lonestarvalorfunding.com, or at my personal cell, which is 737-802-4558. And I try to answer. A lot of times I'm in meetings, so if you call, please either leave a message or shoot me a text, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can.
Yeah, yeah, brother. So when you got out, man, because man, you were a combat engineer, you were a respiratory therapist, and then you roll into the financial aspect. Like what? That's like a totally different jump. And what was it that led you into doing that versus leaning back on the training that you had for respiratory therapists?
So that's a great question. Um, I kind of hit this wall when I was getting out, because I was going through all these surgeries, for my shoulder. I had a static line injury, and so uh, through that process, I just kind of hit this wall. I had worked, in high stress environments, as a respiratory therapist, and here at BAMC, which is a high trauma hospital, as well as the burn center here. And then I worked at Launch Stool, which is another, hub for where they bring, soldiers from downrange, and they stop there. They package them up, make sure they're good, and then they send them out. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that as a respiratory therapist, when they say, people pull the plug, or in care, it's typically the respiratory therapists that do that. And so, unfortunately, I've had to do that many, many times, and it took a wear on me, and I just, um, I got it burnt out, from it. And so I thought, that I could get into, something that would be in the medical field when I got out, but it just wasn't the case, to be honest. I struggled finding that right job when I got out, and it took me, almost a year probably to start reevaluating what I should do, because I probably put in 1,000 applications, because I think one of the worst parts about, exiting the military is, with the TAPS program, is they kind of fill you with this false sense of, hey, you're a veteran, like everybody wants to hire veterans, so when you get out, you're going to be ready to roll, you're going to get hired right away, like everybody wants to hire you. And then when I got out, that wasn't the case, and so I was like, well, shit, now what do I do? And for me, I've always been a numbers guy, and so both with doing combat engineer and respiratory therapist is very number oriented. So obviously with combat engineer, doing demo calculations, explosives, making sure obviously we have the right explosives between blowing up a house or blowing up a door. There's big differences, right? Yeah, you don't want to mess that up. And then
Breach the house.
so that's kind of critical there. And and then with the respiratory field, we had to have the right number, for the lung volume. You had to make sure that, your ventilator was set up with the right numbers, so that
Yeah,
you
you don't want to
weren't,
blow up lungs.
the lungs. Yeah. And so, it's very number oriented. So I'm a numbers guy. Like, I like data, I like numbers. And so ended up going back to school for accounting. But honestly, accounting can be very boring, because you're kind of in the back office. And that's what I ended up going, working for the nonprofit. Was I was kind of working in the back end, and helping them with their balancing of the books and stuff, and I enjoyed it. But again, it's, I was kind of by myself, like at home, and I was like, I want to do more, like I enjoy this, but I don't feel like it's my purpose, and so, I've always had the itch to be a business owner. And I was like, well, numbers, like what's the best way? And I kind of evaluated, and I felt like this was a kind of a perfect opportunity, and I've kind of feel like I fit right into this field.
Jared, can you walk me back
How far?
to
Oh, sorry. No, I'm
before?
just
No,
kidding.
that's fine. Before
Sorry.
you joined the military, right? Um, and as you were making that decision to join the military, if you could, with all the knowledge that you have now, if you could talk to that guy, what advice would you give him to be successful during your journey in the military?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't. It's a really hard question, and I've always kind of thought about that. If I went back, would I change anything? Or, would I do anything different? For me, like when I joined, I already knew I was going to join the army in high school, like, because where, I went to high school, it wasn't really, there wasn't really anything there, that I could do that. I didn't, it's a small town. Even the county was really small. There wasn't a whole lot there. So like I knew there wasn't anything there for me, and I knew I would have to pay for college myself if I went to college. So I just knew, it wasn't there for me, so the military was my way out. essentially. And so the only thing I guess for me that I would maybe consider changing, but I think it's a hard one, but it is I decided not to redo my ASVAB, which kind of sounds like a stupid thing. But when I was in high school, I was like, I don't want to take any more tests. And my ASVAB was just shy enough to become a medic at the time. And so I really enjoyed I really wanted to be in the medical field to start with, because I did EMT in high school and I really enjoyed that environment and I really wanted to be a flight medic. And so, um, you know, I kind of wish that maybe should have I missed it by a couple points, and then when I retook my ASVAB in the Army, like I didn't really, I didn't study for it. I'm not trying to brag, but I scored way higher. So I was just lazy because nobody explained to me when I took they made us take the ASVAB in 11th grade. And it was more of a just to see where we fit, you know what I mean? So I didn't know what this test was. So I didn't take it serious. You know what I mean? And so I didn't score that high or high enough, in my GT score to get, a medic at the time. My recruiter, I guess I had a decent recruiter who was like, you could retake it, and you can get higher, but you may get lower too. And you may lose some jobs. And
Right,
so,
right, right.
and I was like, I don't really, and so he was like, well, go to do a combat engineer. It's 3 years. We'll give you airborne, and then I'm like, oh, okay. They showed me a little video and it was like a video of people blowing some shit up. And I was like, meh, all right. Yeah, sounds fun. But I also think that, being a combat engineer has kind of helped form me, you know what I mean? To who I am today. So it's hard because, um I've lived through so much as a combat engineer and got to see that side of the army, so I feel like I'm fortunate because I got to see both sides of the army. I deployed as a combat engineer, so I got to be outside the wire, got to get blown up, all that fun stuff. And then on the other side, I deployed as a respiratory therapist, so I got to be on the base. Didn't get to leave, didn't have to leave. I got to listen to. I was with the British, so I was at Camp Leatherneck and Bastion, and so I got to listen to the Marines talk shit about all these fobbits, and I'm like, I remember that day. I remember me being in Iraq talking shit. So it made me laugh, but you know what I mean. Like I got to see the full perspective, and so it's hard for me to say that I'd go back and change anything because I met a lot of friends and it's shaped me to who I am. I just, there's always that path that you gotta walk.
For all our listeners, the ASVAB is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. What that means is the test that will determine what jobs you're applicable to, what are the best fit for your knowledge, right? I myself, Jared, I had no idea what it was, right? I literally took a nap during the test, and I scored pretty high, not to brag either. But had I known the importance of how that would literally change my life for the next 20 years, I would have, I honestly would have retaken it also. Um, Not that I didn't like what I did. I loved what I did my entire career, or what I'm technically still doing because I'm still active. Um, but it would have opened up different doors, right? And nothing against recruiters because they have a job that they have to do, but the importance of having that knowledge is more crucial to a service member, especially while they're in and after they get out, right? To be able to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. I think that would make better retention overall because if you go in with the right knowledge and know what you're getting yourself into, it's still if you choose not to retake it because you don't want to, at least it's on you, right? But if the recruiter is able to share that experience and tell you exactly what it is, at least you know you're educated, and at least that's on you, not on them. What do you think?
No, and that's exactly, and it's funny because, um, it is important, I think, to understand what they, because we got it described like, oh, you're gonna take this test, and it's gonna show you what jobs you qualify, not for the or the military, just in general, like they made us look at this little graph, and they were like, if you fall into this, then these are kind of some of the jobs you might be interested in, or if you know what I mean, like. And so I was like, I don't give a shit about this. I was going in the military, like, I'm like, and so but I didn't know, again, like, I didn't know the importance of it. And so yeah, I would absolutely. And the only other thing that I kind of small regret, just because I was is I actually had another job picked before combat engineer, and sometimes I regret not keeping that job just because I wonder how badass it would have been, and that was an interrogator. Um, yeah, yeah. So I had interrogator selected as a job, but the reason why I switched that job was because they wanted a 6-year obligation. And at the time, I was still, in my head, I was like, I want to be a medic. I want to be in the, I want to be a flight medic, and I was so focus driven that I was like, man, 6 years is a long time to not like my job. You know what I mean? And like, you know what I mean? That was my thought process. I was just like, man, 6 years. And then to, try to switch into another job, like, and so that's what made me go into the combat engineering world, because it was like, oh, you can do that for 3 years. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a breeze. And like 3 years is easy. You know, so sometimes that's my only little regret, is like, man, what would it have been like to have taken the interrogator job? And I might have been, what was that, Ghrabi, prison. Never mind, sorry. Never mind.
We know what you're
Yeah,
talking
Sorry.
about.
Yeah.
Abugatti.
Um, yeah, the whole prison thing there. But
Yeah.
One more question about that. Now, especially because you were not ready for your transition, right? It just absolutely just came out of basically the left field, and you just had to roll with it. Uh, if you could go back and talk to yourself, right? I'm not regarding changing anything, but what advice would you give yourself, um, and how early would you give yourself that advice to be ready for what was going to be coming forward?
that's a hard one. I mean, so I would probably say, the biggest thing is the finances. My finances weren't in order, to be honest, and so I think that's what really screwed me over more than anything. I think, especially in the enlisted side, we live paycheck to paycheck. A lot of us do, and I know it's hard to not live paycheck to paycheck, but especially when you have a family. And so that was my biggest issue, was by the time I got out, I didn't have a whole lot saved. And when you medically leave, right, well, when you leave the army, right, your last paycheck gets held, right, for a certain period of time. And so you don't even get your last military paycheck. Then it still takes a while for either, I was medically retired, so they kicked in my retirement check, but that was $1,000, maybe, I think it was, but then it still took 2 months for my VA disability to kick in, to help kind of offset that. And so, um, there was I had to make the decision of what bills to pay and what not to pay. And so that hurt my credit. And so it's finally just now getting to the point where my credit's fixed. But I think that's the biggest thing, is financials. Um, because I had 20 years in my mind.
So you started out with a 20-year plan kind of thought, right?
Yeah, 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 because I mean, as everybody, says, you pass that hump. So once you get over that 10-year mark, you kind of already committed, right, to the 20-year, um the 20-year mark, right? Because it's like, well, you made that decision to reenlist after that 10-year, and so it's like, well, we're already here, and so for me, it was like, okay, we're doing 20 years. And so I started having surgeries, I think, at the 12-year mark. And so, it wasn't, and so they did two surgeries, and I had to do all this rehab. And so
Yeah. So when you were going through your transition, kind of looking back, what kind of process did it take you to get into the right mindset that this was happening? You were transitioning. What did you do to get into that right mindset?
I don't think I was ever in the right mindset, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it ever really sank in. Because I don't think it sank in until I left. Because it happened so fast. When you like the way the medical like med board process goes. Through that whole process. Once through my surgeries, I had so much leave saved up. So, because obviously I wasn't using leave because they were giving me permissive TDY for my surgeries, right? And so I didn't have to use leave, and so I had, I don't know, 70 plus days of leave, and so when they say, okay, you've accepted your med board, they they send it up and then they come back with a date of ETS, and so that date is typically 90 days out. Well, so for me, like I had to start out processing pretty much immediately because my leave, you know, would take up the rest of that, and then I still had to cash in leave. Like they still had to pay me the rest of the leave because I had extra, so it was almost immediately. So I was kind of waiting to hear what the results were, and then they're like, "Okay, you're good to go. You're medically retired. Uh, here's your orders. Start out processing." And I was like, "Oh shit," like this is happening. And so it just didn't really sink in until afterwards. You know.
Yeah, it's funny that you're like, man, that gravity of the situation hit you really hard once you were actually in it, and it's because we're so wrapped around with these little tiny things that are happening, and that kind of brings us back to what you earlier said was that hey, it's living paycheck to paycheck. Um, really is something that we as veterans really understand because we did it in the military. And you're going to do it at some point in time, but it's like you got to, the only way that you get out of it is if you start preparing and you start setting aside and you start getting, all your stuff situated so that way um, you're pretty much getting yourself out of that situation. And you got to do that with your transition too. And that's why we so strongly recommend everybody 2 years out, like start planning 2 years out. And in a medical situation, man, it kind of hurts, and that's why you should always have in your thought process whenever you're doing your career mapping. For the Navy, we have our career development boards. Um, you should also have a plan for when you get out, even though you plan on staying in, plan to stay in, plan to get out. So that way you have that backup contingency going on. I know a lot of people are like, oh no, burn all the ships and just go straight forward. But you got to have that what's next plan.
So I think the other thing is, especially, um, you're not going to necessarily even have your leadership to help you. Like especially in the environment that I was in as a respiratory therapist, we didn't really have um, the leadership like we do, like we did in the line units. You know what I mean? Like to be honest, like most of us kind of like treated our senior leaders, like they were just our boss more than they were a senior leader, um, and so we didn't have that relationship like I did as the line unit, and so there's not that conversation of like, hey, how you doing, how's your finances doing, like, are you ready to get out, like, are you preparing, or, all of that stuff that like a good leader would have that conversation with. Some of these MOSs are just not going to have that situation.
Yeah, and that's a great point to point out that um, so your unit, you guys all like bled, sweated, like it's really intensive. It's a different environment. So I totally don't blame you saying that kind of stuff, but it's also depending on the type of leadership that was in there, man. And anybody can create an environment where you're not looking at the person as a boss. So that, man, that's really interesting that you pointed that out. Go ahead, Yogi. Yogi just figured out how to use this mic.
I was testing you guys, making sure that you guys were paying attention. Um, yeah,
Lip
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 reading.
reading.
I wanted to dive a little bit more into the medical board, right? Um, because so I'm currently going through a medical board myself. Uh, I can tell you from my side, it has been a blessing, right? Now, hindsight being 2020, what it is, right? But I've also been on this medical board for now, well, the limb-do and the medical board process for a long time compared to what some of the other members that go through the medical board are, right? And this has allowed me to find really what the problems were, and all, but also what the right diagnosis, right, versus just suggestions, medical suggestions. So that's one thing. The second thing is it allowed me to have that cushion that I was not gonna have by just getting out, right? My mindset was I'm gonna retire in Japan. I already have it kind of figured out. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna be in Japan, living in Japan, having a bar, and just living my life. Whereas now everything changed, and I'm in San Diego, and I'm like, well, what am I gonna do, right? Um, but this has allowed me that time to find out really what it is that I want to do, how I want to do it, right? And I went through that cushion, but one of the things that I want you to talk about, if you don't mind, is how was your experience once you were told that you were going to go to the med board, right? And once you were going to go limited duty, the med board, and then you mentioned you had less than 90 days to get out, right? Um, did you have any guidance? Was there a real clear path for you to go through, or was it just kind of like figuring it out as you're going through and stumbling your way across?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first off, I kind of had the same, I guess, vision as you, where I was like, I wanted to do respiratory when I got out of the military. That was my vision, right? I was going to get out. I'm going to be a respiratory therapist, easy breezy, and then so when I hit that wall, at the same time. But for the med board process, um, I kind of had some time to prepare, but because it was kind of frustrating, to be honest, at first, because um, m- my command, I had a great command. I can't really say anything bad about my command, but my command decided to put me in a med board after my first surgery, and we were like, "Well, we still have another surgery to do." We already had a plan for another surgery, and so it was like, "Well, why are we going to go through this whole process?" And so they started the process, but then when they quickly realized that, or the med board team realized that I was about to go through another surgery, they were like, "Well, we're going to deny this because we want to see what happens with the surgery and see what the rehab is." And so um, I didn't really understand that aspect of it, but when once the second surgery happened and it failed, and talking with the docs, I luckily I had a good, medical team, I think, with the doctor and that, and it was like, well, what do we do now? Like the surgeries didn't really help. I'm not really improving, like how do we move forward? And we had a good communication with the doctor, and the doctor was like, I think it's best for you to med board. And I was like, well, I want to get better. I don't want to med board. And he was like, well, you're kind of shit out of luck, to be honest. And I'm like, oh, well, that's great. So my med board process was, I think, about 9 months total. But I kind of fought the initial ruling on my med board, because for me, I really tried to make sure that I medically retired instead of medically separated. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's that magic 30%, of your disability, what dictates if you medically retire or separate. And so, like, I could have made bank if I medically separated, because my injury was due to a combat or training environment. They were gonna give me like, I don't know, it was like $70,000 lump sum and tax free, and it was like, wow, that's a good chunk of change, like, you know, and it was very enticing for me. But for me, it was like I was more concerned about making sure I had health care and that, because that scared the shit out of me, to be honest. I was hearing all the horror stories of how much healthcare. So I really wanted to push for medical retirement over the separation. Um, but it was kind of a mess, to be honest. They were like, "Hey, here's your VA appointments," and so like I didn't really understand when they told me to, like, write all my issues down, like, what I was doing for that at first, you know what I mean? And then next thing I know, I'm being set up for a VA appointment for the ratings, and I was like, "Oh," I'm like, "I didn't put everything down. I didn't even understand what we were doing here." Like, so there was just some of that miscommunication in that, but otherwise, it wasn't bad. It was just that waiting. There's a lot of waiting, because, and so I think that's probably the most frustrating thing about it is just there's a waiting and then it's go, then it's waiting and then go, waiting and go. And it's like, okay, so like as soon as you hear something, you have like, what is it, like 10 days to respond, and then you respond and then you have to wait some more. And then, and then they respond and then you got to respond, you know what I mean? And so it was just this go, wait, and so that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, you're trying to do all your medical stuff. You're trying to take care of that, and then I feel like that's probably why the gravity of the situation when you stepped out hit you, and you weren't baited by that $70,000 carrot that they were hanging in front of you either, because that's what a lot of people will look at. They're like, oh man, yeah, $70,000, yeah, but they don't tell you is that you're not going to get in your VA payments because it's all got to pay that off, and there's so many stipulations on depending on what your situation is on
So
that too.
that's I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah, go ahead.
that's somewhat correct and somewhat not correct. So you have to pay that back if your injury was not due to combat or training related. If it's due to those two things, then you don't have to pay it back, and it doesn't get taxed, because it's yeah, so, again, so it was like, "Oh, okay, cool, I'll take that," and now, then I don't have to worry about it. But at so that was kind of the enticing part about it was that, and I had a good lawyer, that, I'd sit down with who kind of explained that to me, and that was the only reason why I know that was because they were like, "Well, this is a training incident, so you would get this, and you don't have to worry about paying it," because that was my fear was I've always heard, "Well, if you get the money, you're gonna have to pay back the VA," and I'm like, "Well, shit, that'll take me forever to pay that back," and so that was you know what I mean? Like, that's what I was scared, you know what I mean? And so, like, that was my concern because that's always what I heard too, and so they were like, "No, if it's a combat injury or, training due to combat, then you don't have to pay that back."
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for correcting me on that too.
And with that, I think it's all on a case basis. And what something that I like that you mentioned, right, is you have to make sure that you verify with your specific case because everything about that is completely different depending on who you are and what you're doing. And you're
All on how it's documented.
right. That's where I was going with it because you could have two people that do the same exact same thing, have the same exact accident, they're going through the same process together, but if it's not documented by your doctors, the right way, if it doesn't have the verbiage, if you don't, when you're doing going to your VA claim, you don't claim that properly, and also as when you're doing your actual exams, if you don't word it properly, all those three things are gonna have three different outcomes or multiple different outcomes according to what you're doing.
I think that's the other thing when you're talking about, like, exams and everything. I wasn't necessarily fully prepared for that either, and so, um, I think being nobody really told me what to really prepare for those, and so I don't think I was most upfront and honest with that, with some of the stuff some of my injuries and that, and so I actually received a smaller rating than I probably should have, and then they reevaluated me later and made it much higher. Because I was a lot more open about it, and it was like, "Well, shit, if I would have known that, I should have been more," and so usually that's why I try to tell people, anybody that's doing the VA, it's like, be open about what, like, because it's hard for us to talk about certain things and do certain things. Um, it's like, be honest with them because it's only going to help you.
And not just that, also talk about what it is on your worst day, not just on a day-to-day basis. Because whenever you go to that event, you might be going and you might be feeling great and peachy, right? Is because that's usually how it works for most of the veterans that I've spoken to, is that they are having the best day ever, and they say, "Hey, how are you doing?" That's the initial question, right? And their answer is, "I'm doing fantastic." Boom. Right then and there, you already started making the wrong track for advocating for yourself, right? Um, those things, and as you mentioned, being completely open and vulnerable, the only person that you're hurting by holding onto your ego is yourself. They don't care about whether you're perfect or you're not perfect, right? They're just there to, and they're just there to evaluate you, um, and also to make a decision, an informed decision for the VA representative that's going to be doing it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the nail, the hammer on the nail. So,
I hit it on the hammer with the nail.
yeah, the nail on the hammer. Yeah, it ain't something like that. Listen, I got fat, now I'm hungry, so sorry. It's no, I think like the other thing too, which is it comes to mind, like when we're talking about like the whole getting out and everything. I think for me, what I realized was that you lose your identity when you get out of the military, you know what I mean? And I don't think people realize that or think about it, but when you've been ingrained with something for even 4 or 5 years, 13 years, 20 years, that's your life, you know what I mean? And so when you leave that identity, because that's what's our identity, right? We're sergeant, whatever, specialist, private, whatever, right? That's who we are. We all know each other by our last names, right? But then when we get out, like, we're like, oh, we have a first name, you know, you know what I mean? And so it's like, you lose that identity. And so trying to find that identity back in the world is kind of hard because, you're so used to it. And so I think it's just important for people to understand that it's a natural thing to feel that way, and it's a natural thing to kind of feel lost at first, but you'll find it. Just keep looking.
Hey, when you were transitioning, man, and kind of where you're at today, what kind of content or what book or podcast that's out there really sticks out to you that transitioning service members should be reading and digesting through the transition?
That's a I don't know if I have a good one for that, to be honest. I'm not a big reader. And for podcasts, I mean, everybody has their own thing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like, find something that relates to you. Like, find something that makes you, tick. Like me, I like tinkering. So like I like messing with cars. I like playing with firearms. That's what. And so that's kind of what I did when I got out of the military. Was I started painting guns. You know what I mean? Because I was like, I like messing with guns. So and so I kind of fell into that world because I was like, what makes me enjoy being me. And I think falling on something like that, and I don't want to say making that your identity, but just following things that you feel, make you joyful, and for me, like, the thing that I tried to do was I honestly tried to distance myself from the military when I got out. because I kind of was, like I didn't want to be the guy that went to, a government job and just sit there and be the miserable guy at CIF, and you know what I mean, like I was like, I don't want to do that, like I don't like the problem with the government job is I feel like it's hard to progress, you know what I mean, and so like like you get into that position and it's like it's hard to get promoted, it's hard to do anything, and so like for me, I was like, I want to progress, I want to grow as a person, and I just felt like it was hard to do that in the government, and so as far as the civilian side, not and so I kind of distanced myself for a while there, because I was like, I don't want, I didn't want to do that, and I think you find your path, you start, but it comes around, but everybody's different. I feel like everybody's different. Everybody has their own niche and their own thing that makes them tick, and it's like, go do that, whatever it is. Um, yeah.
Well, with that, Jerrod, we are extremely thankful for you to coming onto the podcast. Are you going to be on the live later on today, which is going to be airing way before the actual episode comes up? However, uh, we're really excited about this. We're really excited about getting to know you guys. This One Hundro Club. We didn't get a chance to really address the One Hundro Club and your role in it, but we're going to be able to do that more on the live later on today. And thank you, my friend. I appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch.
Definitely. I appreciate you guys having me on here. It was wonderful. Thanks for letting me ramble on a bunch, and so thanks.
Yeah, brother. Hey, thank you, Jerrod, so much. Like Yogi said, hey, everybody that's listening to this. All right. So if you're watching the show, you're going to see his LinkedIn, you're going to see his link tree on here, and his websites. All right. So please go out there and connect with him, especially on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find like minded people that are going through the transition.
The only thing I would like to add, the only thing I'd like to add, I apologize, just real quick. My services are free, so if you have questions or that, it's free to talk to me. So please come and ask your questions. Feel free to pick my brain about business lending or anything like that. But just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, brother. Thank you for putting that out there. All right. Mil2Vet tribe. It's your transition. So take charge of it. It's not all rainbows and unicorns out there. Go follow Jerrod Smith, and you guys have a great day. Mil2Vet out.